6 p.m. and welcome. Welcome to Monty Ramirez, our webinar dedicated to uh, impact of what we believe the Trump administration's impact on business immigration. So presenting with me today will be attorney Saif Ali. And I just wanted to kind of give you all a little bit of information. Over the past 3 months, our firm has been presenting webinars. I guess the first series was devoted to DACA and Dreamers on ways and strategies for actually obtaining residency. We are going to be updating those webinars and those seminars in as soon as the new administration comes in. Okay, because the truth is, right now, we're just guessing what's going to happen. Okay, we're dealing with, President Trump, and, we don't quite know how, we know we practiced and we suffered through that first Trump administration. So we know what was done in the past. But you know what? There could be changes. There could be changes. So what we're trying to do right now is try to calm the nerves by providing you with information on what our experience has been in the past. As far as the DACAs and the Dreamers, we don't know. We do have those strategies on obtaining residency, which still will work, but we're going to represent that information once we get a little bit more information. Last week, we had a family and humanitarian status update, or what we thought might be the impact, okay? And again, we will be presenting that again once we have more concrete information. But today we are speaking to the impact of that on employers and those who sponsor visas, okay? Because I think we have a good idea of what to expect, but we want to remind everyone we don't know for sure. And for that reason, we're inviting you now to the 28th of January. We're going to be repeating this information and hopefully having updates. Last, under the first Trump administration, 7 days after taking office, we were hit with the Muslim ban. So we know now that Trump and his advisors are ready to go, and they've made some promises. So we're going to be ready as well to try to see what that impact is, okay? So today's presentation, again, is just based on what we believe is going to happen, okay? And we will be coming back and reporting more, okay? So to begin with this, and I'm going to be running the PowerPoint because my desk is working and attorneys isn't. So let's see. Saif, why don't you go ahead and tell us what to expect in today's seminar?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to just go over a brief overview of what the PowerPoint is, kind of the structure. The first things that we're going to be talking about are kind of expectations, educated guesses. I don't want to call them just guesses because we're doing this based off of our knowledge of what happened in Trump's initial administration, as well as some of the statements that he's made on the campaign trail and who his advisors are and things that we expect from practice might come into play. And the first topic we're going to tackle is the immigrant visa process. And as an aside to that would be the PERM labor certification process. So for employers who are sponsoring employees through the permanent residency process, we'll forecast some issues that are going to come up there. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the non-immigrant visas, and that would be the H-1Bs, the L-1 intercompany transferees, a little bit about TNs and O visas, which are extraordinary ability. And we'll also talk about the impact on international students, because that also leads into, there's many F1 students who are employed at employers under the OPT program, STEM OPT program, and we're anticipating some changes there. After that, Sarah will take over and she'll discuss changes in enforcement and compliance priorities and the interplay of government agencies like ICE and some of the enforcement priority changes that we might see with the Trump administration. We'll also talk about the travel difficulties and the travel bans that we're anticipating. As Sarah mentioned, very soon after his first administration, Trump launched into the Muslim ban, and there was a court history back and forth, but of course, there were several attempts at getting that ban, and so we're anticipating future bans as well, and so some difficulties might arise there. We'll also talk about the impact on some other work authorized statuses and programs, mainly DACA, TPS, because there's many hundreds of thousands of people in the United States that are employed pursuant to that. And so as employers, it's important to know how those changes might impact your employees there. And then finally, we'll round off and we'll talk about what employers can do to prepare, some tips and strategies on after you digest this information about what changes might be coming down the pipeline, what you can do to prepare for that. So Sarah, I think if we can go to the next slide, please. So the first issue that I mentioned was going to be the issues for immigrant visas and for the PERM and the labor certification process. So we're anticipating some changes to immigrant visa and PERM process. It may be a little bit more limited in comparison to what we're expecting for the non-immigrant visas and for students and for DACA and TPS, but there are going to be some changes. And one of the biggest X factors here in the upcoming Trump administration is what I like to call the Elon Musk factor. Elon Musk and other new notables in the Trump administration have pushed for a reduction in the size of the federal government, and that means slashing federal jobs. So what that means is if there's a reduction in federal jobs, that might affect agencies that are heavily involved in the immigration process. And especially on the immigrant visa and the PERM side, we're talking about Department of Labor, which handles the entire PERM labor certification process, and as well as DHS, which includes U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which handles the immigrant visa petitions themselves. And of course, it'll be felt more by the employees, but also the green card processing. So if there is a reduction in the federal workforce, then there are anticipated slowdowns. There might be fewer resources allocated to adjudicating, for example, Department of Labor PERM certifications. There might be more audits, and we can expect processing times. For example, for PERMs right now, we're looking at almost 13 to 14 months. And if there is a reduction in the federal workforce, that might not get any better. So there might be more audits as well. And we can anticipate an increase in denials and definitely slow down in processing, especially once we get an idea of what that reduction of federal workforce, if any, it may not happen, but if it does happen, it will have an impact. And we'll get a better idea once, Trump takes office. Another thing that we're likely to see is the return of interviews for employment-based green card applicants. Under the Biden administration, many of those interviews have been waived, meaning that your employees who are in the final home stretch of the green card process did not have to go into the USCIS field offices to be interviewed by a USCIS officer. Most of the interviews were waived, but under Trump, we're likely to see those come back. And that adds on to the whole federal workforce reduction thing, because that's a time-consuming process. And if it comes back and there's a reduction in USCIS staff, we can only anticipate that processing times will continue to increase. And there's also going to be, I think the most important thing maybe is that there's going to be increased scrutiny across all employment-based green card, applications. Particularly, I think, on EB1, which is the extraordinary ability petitions, and on EB2, national interest waiver petitions. Part of that has to do with the Buy American, Hire American executive order that was instituted last time in 2017, and we are expecting some form of that to return. And Buy American, Hire American, we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but it increased protections for U.S. workers and for the U.S. economy. And so in that context, in the immigration context, there was prioritization of certain industries. For example, oil and gas might make a comeback in this field, but other fields, for example, renewables and clean energy, those might be deprioritized. And so EB1 and EB2 NIW petitions that have the potential to create jobs, for example, and drive the US economy might fare better than others. And as a result of Buy American, Hire American in general, there'll be more scrutiny on all aspects, not just EB1 and EB2 NIW, but also the regular PERM process. In addition, I think on the immigrant visa petitions themselves, we'll also see an increased scrutiny on the ability to pay issues for employers as part of that process. Employers have to prove that they can pay the Department of Labor determined wage, prevailing wage to their employee. And those issues have been looked at somewhat leniently by the Biden administration DHS, but we're anticipating that with Trump, there's just going to be more scrutiny on ability to pay issues. And so proper planning is going to be necessary when looking at this whole process from start to finish, that, you know, that issue can be tackled, because it's not something that comes up immediately, but you do want to prepare for it in advance. If we can go to the next slide, please. And on the other side, on the non-immigrant visas under the Trump administration, you know, the primary impact of the second Trump administration will likely be felt in the H-1B specialty occupation worker program, but we're not ignoring that there will be, you know, effects to the L1, to O visas, and to other types of visas that are employment sponsored non-immigrant visas. So, for example, the L1A and B intercompany transferees, they definitely faced increased scrutiny under the first Trump administration. The TN program, which is, excuse me, visas that are under the NAFTA and now USMCA treaty, those, you know, they were renegotiated. The NAFTA was renegotiated under Trump's first administration, and it became USMCA. And the TN program wasn't really affected, but there are possibilities that it may be affected in the second administration. There's been some back and forth about trade with Canada and Mexico, so changes may be coming in the pipeline for that one. And some of the hot topics that I think we're going to be seeing, especially increased scrutiny, there'll be increased scrutiny on maintenance of status issues. So for H-1B employees, if there's any small lapses in status, if there's any issues related to travel with I-94s, maybe an employee is coming back into the country after a vacation and there's a paperwork issue. So little lapses like that may not even fully be the employee's fault, may be held against them. So maintenance of status, in addition to increased scrutiny on all documents submitted as part of petitions, H1, whether that's H1B, TN, O, or the L visas or any other employment sponsored, there'll be more scrutiny on the documents as well, because USCIS will be analyzing for fraud and to make sure that all documents are legitimate. We're very likely to see an increase in denials and requests for evidence. In the first Trump administration, we saw heavy challenges to the H-1B program, and those challenges included specialty occupations. So there was a little bit of targeting of certain IT type roles and things of that nature. Entry-level positions were targeted. Anyone basically, essentially, if you were hiring an F1 student or an international student out of college and offering them an entry-level position, those were heavily scrutinized as well, and there were requests for evidence and denials on that. We anticipate that there's going to be increased scrutiny on degree requirements. Sometimes degree requirements may not match to what USCIS determines or thinks is best for that role, and so they may issue RFEs based on that. Last time we saw heavy challenges to third-party placement programs. So if you're an employer that works with contractors or consultants, and those contractors and consultants are H-1B employees, there were a lot of challenges based on control of those employees that we saw in the first Trump administration. So issues like that are very likely to come back in. You know, as I mentioned in the earlier slide with the immigrant visas, if there's any reductions in the federal workforce, again, processing times might increase. And in the last time in the first Trump administration in 2020, and this rule never went into effect, so we're not sure what the effects would be once it does, but it's very likely that the Trump administration will once again try to raise wage levels for H-1B visas to limit the use of the program. So last time they actually raised wage levels by quite a bit, which would have put the H-1B visa out of reach for some smaller employers, and it would have restricted the use to essentially very highly paid positions. This was never implemented because in 2020, President Biden won the election, and his Department of Homeland Security shelved that rule, and it never came into effect. But it is likely that some form of wage level regulations are going to be imposed on the H-1B program once the second Trump administration comes back into power. If we can go to the next slide, please. So one of the topics that we just touched on was the Buy American, Hire American executive order. It's likely that this policy is going to come back in some form or fashion. It was originally instituted in April of 2017. And what it did the first time around was that it directed Department of Homeland Security and other agencies to advance policies to make sure that H-1B visas were awarded to only to the most skilled and highest paid beneficiaries. So some of the issues that we just touched on were, wage levels, entry level positions. Those might come under fire under a second or a Buy American, Hire American 2.0 policy. The objective of the order was to protect American workers and strengthen the American economy. But what the impacts of that were that the first time around, the non-immigrant deference policy was eliminated. And that's a policy that used to exist before Trump, and it was reinstated by President Biden when he came back into office, or when he came into office in 2020. And it provides deference in situations where USCIS has approved a petition previously, as long as there's not a material change to the terms of employment. So we're expecting that with Buy American, Hire American 2.0, the deference policy is almost certainly going to go away. And what that means is that USCIS is going to be reviewing those petitions without giving any kind of consideration to those previous approvals. So extensions that have no material change to them are still going to be scrutinized from top to bottom. And even though there might be a petition approved in the past, that isn't going to bear into USCIS's future decisions. Now, on the other side of it, there's going to be analysis on the complex petitions. We talked about EB1s, which is for extraordinary ability, EB2 national interest waivers. If there's an argument that can be made in support of the Buy American, Hire American policy, for example, that a person of extraordinary ability is coming to do some kind of endeavor that's going to help the American economy, or it's in the national interest of somebody's endeavor to help the American economy. There's an endeavor that has the potential to generate jobs. Those kinds of petitions might be favored under Buy American, Hire American. We talked about oil and gas industry perhaps maybe coming back into favor with the economic policies of the Trump administration, and climate change, renewable energy, clean energy, that might be taking a back seat. So the focus would be on job creation, the positive impact of the U.S. economy, contributions to the field, and how it helps America retain a competitive advantage. Those might be factors that we come see into play in the complex petitions. At the same time, there's some pro-business immigration factors in the Trump administration. And while we can't really forecast what the impact of them will be, people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk have talked about, and other tech leaders have talked about, some pro-business measures. And for example, Elon Musk and Tesla and SpaceX, his companies, actually are big users of the H-1B policy. So, some of that remains unclear. We're not sure how that's going to shake out. There are some voices that are pro-immigration, pro-business immigration specifically in the new Trump administration. But right now, we don't know, to what extent that is going to come into play versus some of the more negative impacts that we are predicting. If we can go to the next slide, please. And with international students, we're also anticipating some changes to how F1 and OPT come into play. OPT is the optional practical training program, and it has a counterpart called STEM OPT, which is for science and technology majors. The OPT allows F1 students to get 1 year of experience in fields related to their major. And then the STEM OPT is an extension, a 2-year add-on that's available to certain majors that are under a list designated by Homeland Security as STEM majors. And so under the second Trump administration, it's very likely that Homeland Security is going to scrutinize students for maintenance of student status and unlawful presence. So any kinds of issues, again, lapses in students obtaining their paperwork, in maintaining their work authorization, students who are unemployed for a certain period of time while they have OPT, those kinds of issues will likely be scrutinized. And it may come into play while they're still obtaining F1 benefits. And it might also come into question when, for example, if you have an F1 student that's being sponsored for an H-1B under the lottery, they might face additional scrutiny, and there might be RFEs on maintenance of status for issues related to work authorization, any lapses or in maintenance of status. The F1 OPT and F1 STEM OPT have been really big reliefs from limited H1B numbers. The lottery is limited to essentially 85,000 new H1B selections every year, and there's a lot more demand. I think there's been more than 500,000 applications every year for the past few years. And so F1 OPT has essentially it's been really great for employers and for F1 students because it's allowed them multiple shots at the H1B lottery in case they're not able to get in their very first time. And any negative impacts to that program could also impact the eligibility or the availability for those students to enter into H1B or work authorized statuses afterwards. F1 processing is usually handled by students individually, but it's important for employers to really understand that your F1 OPT and STEM OPT employees are going to be kind of fighting their own battles because they have to balance, of course, between the employer. There's paperwork requirements with their school officers and with DHS and the agency that handles that, SEVIS. And so they're going to be handling, there's going to be a lot more pressure on them as well to maintain their status and make sure that they're handling everything without any lapses. And right now, demand for highly qualified F1 students is high, but last time we saw in the Trump administration, we saw that there were some negative effects because there was a chilling effect on student applications and the amount of international students that were coming into the U.S. So this reserve of talent might start to dry up as we see the effects of the new Trump administration come into play. Now, Trump has made some really vague statements about providing a pathway to residency for foreign students, but there's no actual policy proposal that's been discussed or that's on the table. So right now, we can't predict anything other than, it's a statement that President Trump made on the campaign trail, but no, there's no concrete proposal that's available. There's also going to be, we mentioned scrutiny on F1 students, but difficulties and delays and visa denials at the embassies and consulates. As we mentioned, if there's a reduction in the federal workforce, the Department of State, which administers the embassies and consulates abroad, they're also possibly going to take a hit. And if there's reductions in the workforce at the consular unit, at the immigration visa unit, those slowdowns will also come into play, not just for international students, but also for all the categories that we discussed earlier for H-1Bs and non-immigrant visas, as well as immigrant visas as well. And then Sarah will touch on it to a greater degree, but there's also going to be some potential travel ban issues. If you have students from Muslim countries, they may face themselves facing a ban within weeks last time we saw it in the first week. So within the first week after Trump is inaugurated, we might be seeing a travel ban go into effect. And of course, there'll be litigation and all of those things, but those things will most likely be coming down the pipeline. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah, and she's going to be discussing enforcement and compliance with ICE next.
Thanks, Saif. The Trump administration previously did prioritize worksite enforcement and compliance. This trend is likely to intensify. However, we've got to look at one of the other promises that President Trump has made, and that is mass deportations. There is no way he's going to get mass deportations by knocking on doors of suspected undocumented. So the only way you can deliver large numbers of undocumented would be under worksite rates. But what's interesting is traditionally in worksite rates, the focus was on prosecuting bad employers, right? And basically the foreign national employees that were caught up in the raids were, the focus was not there. This is, I think, going to be very interesting because, yes, ICE will be focusing on bad, I-9 compliance and everything else, but there's going to be a particular emphasis on Section 1 of the I-9. Section 1 is part of the application that the employee completes act. And we have long advised employers, not to get involved in that whole preparer section or in the translator section. for fear that there might be some sort of suggestion that an employer was helping or coaching an employee on what to say they were. Um, so that's going to be really interesting to see what the focus of the raids are. Okay. And one of the things that if they do want to go for mass deportations, there's going to be an emphasis on trying to prosecute the foreign national, specifically, making false claims citizenship, probably looking to see whether a good social has been used, a good social meaning a social security number that belonged to someone else, thereby opening a foreign national to document fraud, identity theft, which is actually a felony. So there's a lot that's going to be going on there. Uh, I-9 compliance and enforcement, this is the time to really look at those I-9s, to have carry out the audits, make sure they look as good as possible. I also want to advise employers, right now everyone is scared, and we shouldn't be scared. We should be informed and we should be talking to each other. But what we don't want is there to be a little bit of a relaxing of, employees coming to talk to their employers about how they feel a little bit uncomfortable. We don't want any confessions at this point. So this is a hard time for employers, because employers care about their employees, and they're worried about them. But at the same time, let's remember what IRCA is. IRCA says that if there is any constructive knowledge, you've got to terminate people. So this is a time to be highly vigilant. It is a time where you would think you would want, to commiserate and say, well, look, this is something that might be happening, and employers concerned, but this is a time that we've got to really watch our P's and Q's. Please don't engage in any behavior that will signal to the employees that, that they can come in and give you information that they haven't given to you previously. Okay. US CIS fraud detection and national security inspections, the FDNS. If you are an L1A, L employer, H1B, basically you've invited federal government employees to come in and check and to come and visit. Make sure that you've got a plan for those visits, because we should all know that they've been relaxed. They had been doing very few of them over the Biden administration. Well, we know that that's going to increase. In fact, on both the H and the L, you pay $500 at the beginning to fund that program. So you've got to expect those site visits and have a plan for them. But at the same time, you've got to remember Department of Justice enforcement. There's a prohibition for discriminating against people who have employment authorization. So don't discriminate either. So it's walking that fine line and having that. Oh, just one more mention about the FDNS inspectors. Remember, a lot of times these guys will tag along with the wage and hour people. And remember, with business immigration, the bad guy is really not immigration or ICE all the time. It can also be wage and hour, okay? Especially if you've got an H-1B program, okay? So this is the time to be, checking your house, making sure that you're settled. You've got, make sure that your paperwork looks good. Unfortunately, we're going to be having problems with travel again, okay? Extreme vetting at the borders, travel difficulties in general, and, last administration under Trump, we did have the Muslim ban right away. Right away, we had that. So, as HR and legal sections, you've got to understand, and you've got to be able to talk to your stakeholders to say, it might be more difficult to travel internationally. It's going to be important to transmit this information to your stakeholders and be prepared. and make adjustments. We the Saif said travel bans are probably likely, and but we don't know which countries would be included, and who knows? Maybe it's not just the Muslim ban. Maybe it's again Ukrainians. I mean, it's like anybody out there. It's like we don't know, but you've got to know that there's going to be something, probably, and how will your workforce be impacted by this ability or this difficulty in international travel? Um, Again, those people, I would say few employers require their foreign national sponsored employees to travel. But if you have foreign national employees that have to travel, you've got to know that actually applying for those visas, it's going to take really a long time. And I know we're just kind of coming out of the COVID backlogs. In some cases, we haven't really. Um, you've got to be able to know that this is going to impact non-immigrant visa issuance as well. So travel should be on your mind. Is it that important? Or if it is, making sure that this is done in advance. Okay. You've got to be able to make sure that your employees, those foreign nationals that are sponsored, there's a list of what H-1B folks need to have when they travel. There's a list for the Ls. There's a list for every visa classification. Make sure you've got that information and you're able to give that information to the foreign national employees. So unfortunately, travel is going to be a problem. That's what we forecast. We hope we're wrong. Okay, this is always for our firm. The DACA and the Dreamers are really important to us. The DACA program is likely to be targeted by the Trump administration. Remember, it was a Trump administration that actually terminated the program in 2017 through a series of lawsuits back and forth. The initial DACA program was preserved. We don't know what's going to happen. Trump has mentioned in passing that maybe he was going to be, considering working with Congress to maybe come up with a dream act. Again, right now he's got the numbers. If he wants to do something in Congress, he can. But meanwhile, we have over 500,000 DACA recipients in the U.S. And so we've got to be able to know that that this program is under threat, and that's actually one of the reasons that we've been focused on trying to give strategies to DACAs and to Dreamers on how to obtain residency. Again, Trump himself has been mixed on DACA, and so let's hope and pray that something will come of it. I think the 212(d)(3) waiver is part of established immigration law. Under Biden, he was going to try to streamline that. I'm hoping that that is still an avenue, and that 212(d)(3) waiver, what it does is it excuses the unlawful presence. So we're hoping that we get more clarity in that aspect. It impacts a TPS. The temporary protected status is a humanitarian relief initiative that protects people from removal. It provides work authorization and to individuals from certain designated countries. Under Biden, he has really increased the number of TPS beneficiaries. Venezuela has been added. There's been a whole series of countries that have been added. So we expect something to be negative to happen in this administration. TPS holders reside all over the U.S. The largest populations right now are in TPS in Florida, Texas, New York, California, and New Jersey, okay? The top countries, TPS countries are Venezuela. Currently, there's 242,000 Venezuelans on TPS. El Salvador, 188, and Haiti, 116. So there might be a little bit of hurt feelings by Trump, given that he did terminate or he attempted to end TPS designations for certain countries, which were actually El Salvador, Honduras, Sudan, but the attempts were blockaded by the courts until Biden's election in 2020. We think that he might be after this program. Biden era expansions to TPS will likely be rolled back, okay? And, Trump was very vocal on what he feels about the folks from Haiti. He's likely going to do something against them. The countries previously impacted by the Trump bans was Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Nepal, that's the one, and Sudan, okay? If you have a workforce with TPS folks, please be aware of this, okay? Please be aware of this. We believe that there's going to be something happening here. Okay, so here we've given you quite a lot of bad news, okay? Or what we believe is bad news, and we hope we're wrong, okay? So what we want to do is we want to break it down on what sponsoring employers or how sponsoring employers can prepare. By sponsoring employers, we mean those employers that have H-1Bs that sponsor foreign nationals, okay? And then we're also going to give a few some strategies on how all employers can prepare. But let's go ahead first start with how those employers that sponsor foreign nationals, how can they prepare? Okay. All right. HR departments, legal departments, you've got to advise your stakeholders. Let people know, let your clients know on the possible increased cost and delays, okay? They're going to have to know that it's going to take longer and it's possibly going to cost more, okay? I think it's a very important thing to understand from your stakeholders which of those foreign national employees are indispensable. I mean, yes, we're supposed to be taking care of everyone all the time, but I think it would be good to find out because special attention should be paid to those people who the organization simply cannot do without. Um, Partly because it might be an issue of budget. I think it's important to ship for your stakeholders, for your clients to be able to tell you that information. Closely monitor expirations. And here it's not only I-94s. I-94s, the earliest time to file an extension if there's no amendment to the job description or work site is 180 days before. What we're going to be planning to do is actually bring that up and actually start talking about extensions 2 months before. Okay, make sure that all your P's and Q's are taken care of. Also to the other expiration, when does, if you've got a foreign national, when does that foreign national age out? When, right now it's taking about 3 years to get through the PERM process to get an approved I-140. Are you starting this process early enough to make sure you're not going to be able, or you don't have to send an H-1B home? So these expirations are you've got to be able to have at your fingertips a whole lot of information to make sure that you are preparing for that which you may not have prepared for, such as the delays, such as cutting in the federal workforce where there's just going to be more and more delays. Insist on over complete filings. Those petitions that you just signed, this is a time to sit down with your legal group and find out, look, we want full cases properly prepared cases, if you can imagine, to be completed. Because one thing that's coming back, the fact that the USCIS can actually deny something without an RFE. Okay, so this is the time to sit with your legal providers and insist that they over prepare your typical filings. We've had such a lovely time under Biden. I think probably for all of our employers, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that all H-1B, it's not an exaggeration to say that we've had probably fewer than 10 RFEs over the last 4 years. Okay, so that is about to stop. Okay, so you've got to work with your legal providers, insist that they are being proactive and anticipating things, anticipating specialty occupation RFEs, anticipate maintenance of status issues. These petitions should go out of the office in perfect condition. Register for the USCIS 5 program. This is a program that used to be very popular, or it used to be something that USCIS would insist upon. They kind of moved away from it. It's a way of just letting the government know who you are, okay? We're going to have to go back to that. And this sounds a little bit fatalistic, but this is a time to seek out partnership with sympathetic congressional liaison. When things get bad and they get very dire, sometimes it's that congressional liaison person that's going to help you save somebody. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but I advise all of my clients to establish a good relationship, because sometimes when push comes to shove, it's those congressional liaisons that can make a real difference. Okay. And finally, and we want to leave some time for some comments. Oops, sorry. Is yes, how can all employers prepare? You know, let's say you don't sponsor foreign nationals. Well, how can you prepare? Evaluate your I-9 processes, conduct internal audits, prepare a response plan in case of ICE investigation. You know, we're going to be losing a lot of workers. Plan on how to replace workers who lose status or are caught up in immigration raids. It's going to happen. You're going to lose people, whether they be DACAs, TPS, F1s that don't make it, or people that get caught up in an immigration raid. This is at a bad time because we already have a labor shortage. Okay, you're going to have to take some deep assessment into, you know what industry you're in. The top 3 industries that are at risk are agriculture, construction, hospitality. If you are in one of these 3 industries, you can't afford not to look at your workforce and know what your vulnerabilities are, and start right now trying to figure out how can you replace these workers in case of the worst. And stay informed. And I guess as far as staying informed, that's our reason for bringing this information. And again, this is just a forecast. This is what we believe is going to happen. But this is a time for us to gather together to share information, okay? Because we're going to have to buckle in. It's going to be a very stressful 4 years. I hope I'm wrong, but everything that we've lived before tells us that that's not the case. So it's important. It's an important time to be sharing information, to be sharing best practices, okay? And with that being said, because we do want to keep a little bit of time for some comments. Keep in touch. We already have planned that on Tuesday, January 28th at 6 p.m., we're going to be meeting again. And hopefully we will be able to fill in some of these gaps with real information, not just what we are forecasting, with real information. We know that Trump's immigration team has been planning on this for the last 4 years. They were ready when they came in 2017. We know they're absolutely going to be ready now. So we're ready to provide information for you on that 28th, the 28th of January. That's approximately a week after he gets inaugurated, because last time he was ready and with changes, so we're going to be ready there to provide you with information and counsel.